All right, doors are opening, so I want to make sure that we let people in and start joining us here today. So I'm going to give it a quick second while everybody jumps on before we start. Hopefully you can see my screen, and I will be turning that off at some point so we can facilitate this discussion, but just know that that's going to be on there for a little while, and there will be contact information at the end, so you won't have to worry or happen to jot that down too fast. You'll be fine. So good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on boosting retention and profits with leadership coaching for GovCons with Boost LLC. As you can see, we all have our fantastic backgrounds. I am Meg O'Hara and I am the Director of Engagement for GovMates, and I'm going to serve as your moderator today, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A and facilitating some of the questions there. So if you do have a question, we'll tell you how to get that into today's discussion. So before we jump into the really good stuff, I'm going to provide you with a few participation reminders if this is the very first time that you have joined one of these events with us. So please try and remove distractions. So we're going to keep this to no more than an hour, possibly less. So if you can silence your phone, stay out of your email. This is a great time for you to kind of like eat lunch while you're listening. So you can, double on that one. And if you can stay out of your email, this is a great reason to do so. Also, we do encourage you to be active in the chat. You should see a little chat box down toward the bottom as well as a Q&A. So if you'll give the chat box a test run, it should allow you to communicate with everyone who's part of the audience here. And in the drop down, you can choose to all attendees or everyone. Otherwise, only I and the presenters will be able to see what you share. You can use it to say hello or let me know that you can hear me. Either one of those would be great. We will also be taking audience questions throughout the discussion here. If something is relevant to the group at large, we'll be sure to touch on it. If your question is a little bit more nuanced, might need, a phone call or a little bit more information, we will make sure to connect with you after the event to kind of get some of those questions answered for you. And then finally, as you came in, it probably told you that was being recorded. We are recording today's discussion. So once that is processed, you should receive the link in your inbox post-event. So look for that tomorrow or later this week. So this is where I get to introduce the smart people for the day, and today's panelists from Boost LLC. So Boost provides services for government contractors in order for GovCons to focus on growth. Meanwhile, Boost focuses on everything else. See how you can take your business to the next level with Boost scalable solutions in the areas of advisory services, accounting, contract management, HR, M&A support, talent acquisition, and all the other things that the SMEs over there are very well versed in. So a little bit about Boost there. If you have questions about what Boost does, we'll also give you an opportunity to ask those later on. Now, I get to introduce, like I said, the panelists, and I'm going to let them kind of talk a little bit about themselves because they are incredibly smart people with incredibly cool things to say. So first up, we have Wendy Ramos. Wendy, will you please tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. Hi, Meg. Nice to see you. Thank you to everybody who's here. I'm really happy to be part of this. So I'm an executive coach. I focus on working with CEOs and their organizations to expand their leadership skills and help them define their business growth objectives. I'm also the Chief People Officer of ISI Professional Services. My business background is that I have about 25 years of experience, of executive level management experience, leading teams in growth-focused organizations.
Perfect. Thank you for being here. And I love all the different hats. Next, we have Carolyn McKinney joining us. Carolyn, can you please tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Carolyn McKinney. I actually have an HR background. I've been in HR more decades than I even want to admit, and became a certified leadership coach around 5 years ago. I am a senior HR consultant with Boost. I handle a lot of different projects. Coaching is my true love. If I could coach all the time, that's what I would be doing in my professional life.
Perfect. Thank you also for joining us. I'm actually going to turn off the screen share now so we can just have our discussion without the distraction, and I'll pop it back on later when we come to questions and contact information. So hopefully everybody can still see things. First question, Carolyn, I'm going to throw it over to you. What does coaching actually mean? Like when we say coaching, what are we talking about?
Coaching, from our perspective, is a professional development activity. The coaching that we're going to talk about today is primarily when we talk about a one-on-one relationship between a coach and what I call a coachee. So typically, our assignments come from the company side, where a company identifies an individual for many different reasons, and I'm sure we'll talk about those today, that could benefit from a one-on-one relationship with a coach. And this is all about business. Wendy and I have talked a little bit about this. Coaching relationships begin with the business goals that the coachee is working on. So it's all around enabling the individual to more effectively achieve business goals and professional growth.
Perfect. And I've heard there's a little bit of a chat between the difference in coaching, like leadership coaching versus executive coaching. Is there any way that you can help me define those and tell me if they are actually different or if we're in the land of synonyms over here?
Sure, I can expand on that a little bit. So typically when people think about coaching and the term executive coach is used a lot, that's for C-suite level. It's a significant investment in the top of the organization, and it's very, very important. When I think about leadership coaching, I'm thinking about the future talent pipeline of the organization. So enabling individuals to focus on leadership competencies. They're a little bit different for every organization, but every organization has them, leadership competencies, whether they know it or not. And what's going to enable that individual to grow as a leader at that organization? And that could be just next level coaching, going from a manager to a director level position, for example, or it could be developing the future C-suite for your organization when it comes to succession planning.
So you're really investing in your people.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Wendy, is it a little like therapy or how is it different?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. Actually, I'm not a therapist, but it is very different. Therapy normally focuses on personally driven, family dynamics, things that have happened in the past, and that's not the what we're doing here with coaching. I mean, we are very much based in the present. The key difference here is that we're very focused on objectives, on goals, and action and accountability. Those are very strong ways of working through coaching together. One of them is through self-awareness. As we become more self-aware, we can identify with our clients what they need to do in terms of moving forward and being able to lead to some results.
Fantastic. I think it may not be exactly therapy, but I'm sure that some of the things that you go through in your sessions can be applied elsewhere other than simply just the business aspect.
I think part of that though is we bring our whole selves to work. And so, right. And so we have to bring a holistic approach to it. And so understanding as a professional, the work life dynamic and how you show up is important and can be really impactful.
Definitely. And so it's just kind of good to go into it with that mindset of like, hey, I know I've got this one focus, but if it does improve other areas, it's an extra benefit.
That's right.
Carolyn, can you tell me at what level of the organization are typical coaches and clients and those sorts of things?
Personally, I've worked with clients from all levels of an organization, and I've been extremely fortunate to have clients in my career that really focused on individual development plans and invested in coaching in that one-on-one relationship. It's really really if you want to say motivating to an employee to have a coach assigned to them. Typically seen at the more senior levels of the organization, but I've seen individual contributors that are being developed for manager roles. I've seen organizations focus on diverse talent pipelines where they were investing more in female and minority candidates that they wanted to move up through the organization. I've seen and coached CEOs that were even very, very senior in their careers and were even looking toward retirement, but just needed a sounding board, somebody to talk to about what's going on in their organization, someone to keep them focused, on coaching goals that are laid out at the beginning of any project. And it can help with a coach to have someone that is external to the organization and can take a more objective view on what the coachee is experienced than they are themselves. So somebody that, can just take that objective, okay, I'm hearing what you're saying, here's what I'm hearing, and here are some questions I'm going to ask you.
And kind of guides them into a space that they might not have identified before. I think when we're definitely in the trenches of what we do for our jobs, it's interesting to have somebody kind of pull your head up a little bit and say, hey, have you thought about this thing? Have you noticed this thing? Or what do you think if, and kind of poses some of those to allow you to expand that thought some.
And sometimes it's just getting confirmation of what coachees already know. They have an idea, or they have a path, or they've made a preliminary decision, and they just need to talk through how to communicate it, how to get stronger in their own thoughts and feel confident in their decisions. It can be a lot of different things.
Perfect. Wendy, can you tell me a little bit about your approach to coaching? Because I assume every coach has their own kind of flair for it. Can you tell me a little bit about yours?
Yeah, of course. My approach to coaching is really to be meeting the client where they're at. That's very important to me. I take a lot of time getting to know them personally and professionally. I'm very goal oriented and results focused, especially as in the business environment, so important. I think the ideal client that we work with is someone who's open and curious and is results oriented and wants the best for themselves, understands that coaching is an investment, and is willing to make those changes that they need to do to be able to come out the other side with some performance goals that actually are actionable and show up in the organization really, really well.
Does somebody usually come to you with a set of goals in mind? Like, I'd like to be able to better manage my team, or I would like to have more confidence in, this, that, or the other. Do they come with that, or is that more of a collaborative experience when you work with them?
My experience has been it happens both ways. Sometimes they come and they say, I'm a newly formed CEO. I'd like to understand, what that means. How do I define that role? And these are my objectives to do this. Or I understand that our team isn't communicating very well. You know, this is what I'd like to work around. And sometimes it's just a conversation and things come out that identify areas where maybe they could strengthen that could help them.
Awesome. Carolyn, can you tell me a little bit about your approach to coaching?
Sure. I have an overall structure to coaching that I like to work with, and this is one that I present to potential clients when I'm talking through projects. I like to start with data gathering. I like to learn a lot about the coachee. I like to look at results of assessments that they might have from their current organization, or as coaches, we can arrange for a variety of assessments. I also really like to talk to stakeholders of that coachee. So that might be a 360 type approach where we're talking to that coachee's direct manager, talking to peers, talking to direct reports, sometimes even talking to customers, and talk about what they see as development opportunities for that coachee. And then developing a formal coaching plan so that we can have accountability for the coachee along the way. I like to have coaching goals that have at least three-quarters of them related directly to business goals. So, smart written as SMART goals. So, for example, our organization is acquiring another company, and I need to develop my leadership skills to manage a larger group. Something along those lines that's very specific and relates to something that's going on within the organization. There are several checkpoints along the way in my coaching plans, so it might be checking back with stakeholders to see how things are going. It might be that there's another assessment done. And it might be that there are quantitative goals where we can really have objective measures on whether the coaching is achieving the goals that we laid out initially.
I always love having a plan. I'm one of those people who is quite data driven. I didn't think I was, because I feel like there's a lot of space for squishiness in coaching where you can have a little bit of that. It's more feelings, it's more an enigma of ideas and things like that that aren't super concrete. So it's nice to know that there's a way that you can kind of set things in place and track and have those milestones to work toward. So you don't feel like you're just kind of floating in a wide blue ocean.
Yeah, and it's important to note as well that coaching sessions are laid out. The goals of the coaching session are laid out by the coachee, and that's actually something that the International Coaching Federation insists upon. So the coachees manage the agenda, but I think that Wendy would agree that sometimes if sessions are getting away from the goals that were originally laid out, good coaches always go back and revisit those goals and say, well, yes, I'm glad we talked about this today, but where are you with this? And it's a way to center discussions, and sometimes it's a way if the coachee is a little bit reluctant or doesn't have an agenda for the day, you can always go back and visit the coaching goals.
You have something to add there, which is great. Is there a certain flair for selecting a coach? Wendy, do you have thoughts on that?
I think my advice would be just be intentional about it. It's really important to take the time. We call it in coaching a chemistry check, but there is, I've seen this where people have someone recommended to them, but they don't take the time to actually get to know that coach, and then it doesn't end up being the right fit. So it's important that the client and the coach come together, do the chemistry check, which means, asking a lot of questions and what does it look like, and really understanding the scope of it and the time commitment and some ideas around objectives, see if it's the right fit, and also making sure that, that your coach is bringing trust, credibility, and confidentiality. As coaches, we have a code of ethics by ICF that we have to follow. So it's really important that the coach that you're working with is accredited or certified in these areas.
And would think that that kind of helps, as Carolyn was mentioning earlier, some of the more reluctant individuals who have either been suggested, maybe executive team or their manager or their supervisor said, hey, this might be a great fit for you, we'd like to provide this. But they might not know really where to start. So having a little bit of that chemistry check time might help them both get to know what would be best in the way that they kind of work with one another. Because I think it probably differs depending on whoever the coachee is.
Well, can I just share this with you, especially
Please.
since we work with so many clients within organizations? As Carolyn and I work with the client, one of the things that we try to make very clear is like the conversation, the coaching we're doing with the client is always confidential. And if we're doing an assessment with them, the assessment stays with the client. It's not something we're sharing with their manager or the organization. It's their decision if they want to share it, who they want to share it with, but it always stays with them. It's for their professional development.
Can you tell me a little bit about what the assessments would be? Are we talking like a personality test? Is it like what kind of assessment are we talking about?
There's many different types of
I'm like, do I
assessment, and
have to
that's something
study?
else with, no, you don't. With coaches, though, they should be certified in multiple different types of assessments. There's the EQI, there's the Hogan, there's a new one, Work Genius that came out. There's several different kinds. You want to make sure that the assessment that you're taking is something that, as a client, you feel also aligns with the direction that you want to go in. If you're trying to strengthen your EQ skills, and that might, the EQI would be a great assessment for you, but just make sure you're aligned with the assessment, because not every assessment is maybe right for the objectives that you're trying to achieve.
So you could have the quote unquote wrong type of data depending on your goals. You don't want to take an assessment that's not going to actually give you information that you need.
That's correct.
If I'm trying to step into finding a coach, so I'm looking to find a coach, what does that coaching process actually look like? And what is the time commitment involved? When you had mentioned a time commitment a little bit earlier. So what does that look like?
Well, at Boost, I mean, we're able to do customized programs for our clients. What I would love to do is just have a conversation with anyone who might be interested to understand their objectives, what they're looking to accomplish. Maybe they have pricing concerns. Maybe they're a startup and they only want to do, a small number of coaching. That's absolutely fine. I mean, we can do, conflict resolution coaching. Maybe it's one session, but maybe we're doing 5 sessions, 3 months. It's really around what the client is looking for. Normally, coaching sessions are biweekly, but I've had coaching sessions with people that are weekly or even daily. So it depends on what's happening that they're dealing with professionally.
Is that something that can fluctuate? So say you have an ongoing, you know, session or relationship with somebody and they say, hey, I know we usually do bi-weekly, but there's a big project coming up, or I'm really struggling with people on my team. Is that something that's fluid?
Yes, I'm absolutely open to being fluid about that.
Perfect. So you could just say, hey, I know, I'm really struggling with this. Could we meet tomorrow? Could we meet
Yeah,
Wednesday? That sort of thing.
absolutely.
Oh, I love that. That feels very comfortable. We had a quick question that did come in that did ask, how do you define a successful engagement? What is the definition for that?
Well,
I'd be
I think,
happy
yeah, go ahead, Carolyn.
yeah, I'd be happy to take that one. So obviously you're starting with predetermined coaching goals that are laid out at the beginning of an assignment. I put a lot of emphasis, as I mentioned, on stakeholder feedback. So check-ins along the way with other stakeholders. I mean, we can all be our own worst enemies, but sometimes we're not hard enough critics on ourselves. So I love to gather that data along the way based upon the predetermined goals. I like to have coachees use self-assessments along the way. So here was our original goal. Maybe it's a quantitative goal around increased productivity or completion of a project or something like that. Rate yourself from 1 to 10 on that goal. And then if the goals are written really well, if they're written as SMART goals, and I do believe that they should be, you know, um, as a good coach, I'm going to ask the hard questions. Okay, you say you achieved this goal. Why do you think that you achieved it? Where's the hard evidence? And assess that way. Sometimes as well, since we were talking about assessments, and Wendy mentioned a lot of organizations use 360s, and 360s can be customized around what's important to the organization. Sometimes I wouldn't recommend it too often, but sometimes a repeat 360 after perhaps minimum 6 months, maybe around a year, can help to see whether coaching objectives have been achieved as well.
Perfect. Wendy, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? What does a successful engagement look like for you?
Well, first, I thought maybe we should define what a 360 is.
Okay, that'd be great.
Yeah, so maybe that's not a familiar term to some people. And basically, what that is that we take the time to speak to your peers, your colleagues, your manager, maybe some external clients as well, to get a full understanding of how you're showing up in your day to day. And I would say from what makes some, coaching session or engagement successful, I think it's both professional and personal. I agree with Carolyn, the quantitative, being able to have them point to say, I achieved all of these results is really, really important. I think also too, though, sometimes there's some intangibles that come through. Sometimes it's their understanding, they'll leave and they'll say, well, how I was seeing myself before I started in this role has completely changed. My self-confidence has improved. So there are things that you can't put on a piece of paper that come out the other side, but that those around them start to actually feel and recognize a difference.
So it's both of those pieces kind of put together. Is there ever a time where, when you talk about the 360, where you're kind of involving others in the area, is there ever a time where they would pull coaches into like a review of some sort in order to, I know it's confidential, but in order to kind of like help shed light, or is that completely separate? So if you're doing coaching, you're not also involved in like, evaluations for the year or something like that?
So my experience has been mostly when 360s are starting, it's usually because there's an employee maybe within a company that has had performance issues. So we'll do a 360, and from there, maybe further coaching will ensue.
Okay.
I actually would like to recommend that leaders start to think differently around there. I think that actually is why sometimes coaching doesn't get the respect it deserves, because we don't use it in the way that could really facilitate change. If we could use it for high potentials and for our executive teams, that really makes a difference in terms of offering professional development to them. It's an amazing way to retain talent.
Yeah, I think Carolyn had mentioned something earlier about how sometimes we use it for just kind of building up that team so that you have a pool of potential individuals that you could move up the chain, as the company continues to grow. It's kind of nice to have somebody who's already well versed and trained and confident about their abilities within the company that then can then move up into a space and they're kind of poised and ready to take on a larger role. Is there a specific time other than kind of like somebody's put on a, improvement something, that we can use coaching other than just like, hey, I think it would be cool for you. Are there certain signifiers that an individual or, their management might say, hey, this might be good for you? Is there something that kind of signifies, hey, let's go ahead and do this? Carolyn, do you have an idea about that?
Sure. You see it a lot when companies are going through times of change or where a change is anticipated for a coachee. So it could be that the organization is preparing from a succession standpoint, preparing leaders for the future. So these are organizations that have a heightened awareness around their talent pipeline, where they're strong, where they need more development. It could be that there is a big business change occurring, like a merger or an acquisition, and those can be very difficult, very hard on people. Lots of stress for everyone during those times, merging different cultures. It could be that, and this is an interesting one. It could be that a coachee is assigned to a coach because they have some type of a derailing behavior. I see that not too often. Maybe 10% of my coachees have had derailing behaviors that they need to work on, and their organizations are willing to invest a little bit further in individual coaching to try and create additional awareness and correct that behavior. As coaches, I think Wendy and I would say that, any time is a good time for an individual to have a coach. I saw and have seen a lot more interest in coaching with the Great Resignation that took place a few years ago, and organizations having heightened awareness that retention of talent, particularly with their high potential, high performing employees, is absolutely key. It's a lot more popular than it was, say, 10 years ago.
Definitely. I also just made a note because derailing behaviors is not a phrase I had heard before, and I think I might need to utilize that later in my life. So I've learned a lot so far, including several little things that I'm like, I think I might write that down and keep that here.
Okay.
And we also had another interesting question, and it said, speaking of improvement plans, do you ever accept engagements that have a goal of transitioning a leader or an executive out of the organization?
Are we?
I can take I
Yeah,
can
go
take
ahead,
that
Carolyn.
one. Go ahead, Wendy.
No, go ahead, Carolyn. You take it.
Carolyn, you can go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, my screen froze momentarily
Oh,
there.
good.
Sorry about that. Um, I've had a couple of assignments where the organization was not trying to exit the individual out, but where they weren't sure if this was going to be the right fit of the organization. Um, I've had a couple of examples where individuals were promoted to roles and or moved to new roles, and they were not operating on all cylinders. So there was some evaluation done there, developmental goals around improvement areas. And I've also seen and had a couple of coaching assignments for new employees, new leaders in particular. Part of that was to help integrate that coachee into their new working environment. Every company's different. Every company has its own operating culture, its own leadership, its own way of doing things. But in some cases, there was an evaluation aspect. And in some cases, even the coachee might recognize, I'm not sure that this is the place for me. So there is an aspect to that. I personally have not had any assignments where the charge has been to gracefully exit a coachee out of the organization.
Fair. Wendy, do you have any experience or thoughts on that as a question?
I do actually. I think it maybe be a side conversation, but if you know that you want someone to leave the organization, what's the upside of coaching them? Is it just making sure that they have the skill sets to move on and be ready for the next company? I don't know if you're setting them up for success if you know they are already going to let them go.
It also, we had talked about coaching as kind of a great retention aid because you're kind of keeping them, you're showing them that you're invested in within them and the things that you know that they're capable of achieving. Is it ever an an occurrence where like you invest in coaching and somebody they're like, okay, I feel great now. I'm gonna go somewhere else. Or do they typically say, hey, I appreciate this. I'm willing to stay. Is it more with the goals of that specific business in mind, or is it more of like a hey, we just kind of want to build you up?
I mean, I've certainly experienced having clients who were doing coaching and then through their own self-awareness decided that maybe it wasn't the right fit for them. It was time for them to move on to another company. Yeah, for sure.
So it might not be that an improvement plan is necessary. They may just come to that realization on their own if that's the
Yes,
goal, of that
yes.
specific coaching. But in general, the coaching is usually utilized for building up the team and helping them to achieve longevity within that business. Wendy, what are some of the tangible or even some of the intangible benefits of investing in coaching for yourself or your team?
Yeah, I mean, Carolyn touched on this a little bit. I think tangible, obviously, any KPI we can point to, right? Whether it's revenue or it's retention, less turnover, higher productivity, excuse me. Those are all things that we can point to. I mean, I get asked all the time, well, what's the ROI of coaching? And there are some, numbers that are out there, but I think more so it's around the intangibility of it, which means you end up having better team relationships. You have more confident leaders. They communicate better with their teams. They have better work-life balance happening. And you know what? They get excited about work again. They like their jobs again, and they want to re-engage. So that's really the key is to have them re-engage and be excited about being there.
Perfect. Carolyn, is there anything you wanted to add to that one?
Yeah, the tangibles, and you got my mind going in a direction here around employee retention. So really good companies invest in professional development, and if the idea of a coach or the opportunity of having a coach is um, is described by the company as we are investing in you, this is to help you grow. This is part of your career growth. It can be a really, really good retention tool. And obviously, retention's a really important KPI for most companies. That's one that I would point to, and also employee engagement. Since we're primarily looking at leaders here that manage teams, and we all know that employees usually leave leaders. They don't leave companies. So employee engagement is one that I would point to as well. And sometimes even employee engagement data and surveys and employee feedback can be good data to use in developing coaching goals for coaches.
With the idea of the executive team, is there an option ever to include coaching as a benefit for them as part of their benefits package? And like, hey, when you reach a director level or, a VP level or something, part of the benefits that come with your position is an access to coaching. Is that something that can be built into growing businesses by chance?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll have Carolyn speak as well, but there's, basically this is the first time we've had 5 generations in the workplace, right? And there's 3 things that people want. They want to be valued, they want to be heard, and they want opportunity for learning and development. And coaching is part of that. So if you can invest in your people and provide that within their benefits package, I mean, that's an amazing opportunity for them.
And is that something that they can outsource by chance? Could they be like, hey, this company, we would like to partner with Boost and say, hey, and offer this to, you know, our individuals, our exec team, our C-suite team, as an option. Is that something that's even on the radar, or is that kind of new in an option for outsourced sort of species?
I think it's definitely in the realm of services we can provide.
Awesome. Is there a good time? We talked a little bit about like, hey, if there's an acquisition or, some sort of a succession plan or something, are there other times in an organization's life cycle that are better than others to engage in coaching? When did you want to take that one to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we touched on it a bit. I think, an organization is never stagnant. It's always in evolution, right? And so I think at any time that you can bring in a coach that can help your team, that it's only going to be valuable. Carolyn talked about acquisition of new companies, the change management. Maybe you're downsizing, right? I mean, anything that touches change. You've got emerging leaders. You've got again generational uh, teams that you're trying to work with. Maybe it's the first time they're working together. These are all great times to bring in a coach to help with them.
Awesome. Caroline, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with Wendy. Organizations are always changing. A lot of what I see in the GovCon space is that we have organizations that are growing. They started off quite small. They're getting bigger really, really rapidly. And from a leadership standpoint, that requires a different skill set. And coaches can help not only define what that skill set should look like for that next level position and for growth, but they can help develop the individual coachee to be more successful and grow with the organization.
From my experience in the GovCon space, which is a little bit different, being on the side where we have an ecosystem, many of our companies are small solopreneurs. They're startups, or they are technical individuals who have then built a company and are now stepping into a leadership space that they didn't expect to be in. So to kind of circle back to that part of the question, is there a better time? I think it depends on where your leadership is and what their previous experience is as well. Because if you've got somebody who was in the technical space and they're creating the pieces and they're engineering all the things, and now all of a sudden they have a team to manage, that may not be something that they have experience in previous to what they were doing. And instead of waiting to see how that plays out, it might be nice to get somebody in there in advance outside of the company to say, hey, I've had experience here. I personally have had experience with coaches who have a lot more experience than I do in a lot of different ways. And I think I've learned more through those conversations than, some of the other pieces of somebody who was, my peer. I think it's good to have different levels. So you have, your peers that you talk to, around, the happy hour. And then you have a coach who has a little bit more experience, is a little bit more structured in the way that you learn. And then you have other people on your team who you're also learning from. So I think it's a piece of a very large puzzle that helps, especially some of those smaller startups or those who are poised for really accelerated growth, not to feel as much of the stretch from a people perspective, because you're going to be stretched in all those other ways anyways.
So true.
When I've started coaching, should I set up one-on-one sessions, or should I try and do team coaching? Is there a preference or a better way to approach it? Carolyn, do you want to take that one for me?
I tend to look at group coaching as training. And
Okay.
there can be a coaching aspect to that training. Group coaching sessions that I've conducted have tended to be around a specific set of behavioral competencies or leadership competencies that an organization feels is important to achieving their business goals. I've used assessments in group training. Um, that type of coaching also requires some ground rules around confidentiality and trust, and making sure that people are really, really transparent in their feedback. Um, I tend to think that one-on-one coaching is going to get deeper and help talent kind of get to the gooey center of, here's what I'm really good at, here's where I know I'm not good and where I need help, or where maybe I won't even go down that path and I'll just do what I do best. So when I talk about coaching, generally it's one-on-one, but there are ways to coach groups in training type development sessions as well.
Awesome. Wendy, do you have a preference there or thoughts on group versus one-on-one?
Yeah, I'll share with you my experience. I think it's really valuable to coach individuals within a team. And out of that, the coach will see high level themes that come out of that, and then come back together with the team and kind of share high level what and work on that. But I think if in a team, team coaching has become really popular. The issue there really is the safety of the space. Team dynamics show up, and you have to be in a psychologically safe space for people to feel comfortable doing a coaching engagement like that. So I agree with Carolyn. I think it's more of like a training, or maybe it's a team building activity versus being actually coaching.
And that's really fair. I think it's easier to be vulnerable when it's one-on-one. And it's
Yes.
easier to, as was mentioned, kind of get into that little gooey center, to make sure that you're hitting on things that are going to make a true difference. We all have people on our teams who have different levels of, being an extrovert, right? If you've got somebody
Right.
who's a constant talker who's really great at sharing, you may miss out on some of those other pieces of people who are a little bit quieter but have really important, great things to say. So I can see how that would be a little bit different, but that there's probably a benefit to doing a little bit of both of those. We have just a couple more questions here. So I did want to mention to the audience, if you do have a question that's kind of been, floating around your brain that you want to ask, make sure that you put it into the Q&A so that we can ask our presenters here to make sure that we get those in before I kind of, wrap things up in just a couple minutes here. But I did want to ask if you all have a coaching success story. It can be off the record. You don't have to use names. But did you have like a favorite client or a specific struggle that you helped a company overcome that you can share with us?
Sure. I mean, my example that it kind of comes to mind touches on what you brought up, Meg, is that it's people who come in as a startup and they're sort of an SME in their role, and all of a sudden they've become in a leadership role. And I've had a client like that who's growing, they're doubling the size, and just overwhelmed with the idea of, well, what does it actually mean to be a CEO versus doing my tech work every single day. And this person was very, very accountable and excited about it, but really leaned into it. And the impact of that has been, because I work with them and also some people on their leadership team, but just seeing how they've been able to build out and restructure their organization. They've put in processes, they've built out a strategic plan, they've looked at their marketing, they've delegated to other people on the team, executive team, so now they know their roles and responsibilities. So just having those conversations with a coach in a CEO role like that, as Carolyn mentioned, it gives them the space to actually start to think strategically and work on the business and instead of being in the day to day. And they've seen tremendous growth and they're doing great. It's
And
really
it really
good.
takes a special person to understand that while this is clearly their baby because they have
Yeah.
created it, to allow others to kind of shine in their zone of genius and say, hey, I understand that these are things that I'm really good at and I need to oversee, but also here are the things that you all can handle. And I need to give you the time and the space and the energy to do that, which is nice. Carolyn, success story, favorite client, super struggle. What do you
Sure.
think?
Sure. I've got one that's fresh on my mind because I just followed up with this individual the other day. We started our engagement about 2 years ago. It went on. His organization was willing to invest as much as it took. So we ended up having the formal part of our coaching for about 9 months, and then I follow up with him every few months now. But this was a client that had a lot of aha moments throughout our coaching sessions. A very, very talented, intelligent individual in a key role at a healthcare organization. But he had derailing behaviors, and we talked about what those mean. Unfortunately, nobody had ever told him about them. So in this case, those upfront interviews with stakeholders and some of the outcomes of assessments were really, really important. And this is one where, as a coach, I kind of had to hit him between the eyeballs with it and work him through. A lot of our coaching session was just working through becoming comfortable that this feedback was accurate and real, and then working on replacement behaviors. So when this happens, what's your reaction going to be? When that happens, we actually had emails going back all the time, back and forth between us all the time, when he would feel like some of those derailing behaviors were coming forth, and he was catching himself. So I'm very, very proud of that coaching, and it's one of my favorite stories. We've all got lots of stories, but that's one of my favorites.
And I love that they were then able to identify, like self-identify from a space where they had not even recognized that it was happening previously. So I like that. I am going to pop in here with my own anecdote because I am not a coach, but I am the product of some really great coaching that was offered to me by my leadership team at one point, not here, but previously. But it definitely helped me in a really interesting transition because I was going from a do it every day person to a position where I would have to potentially manage people. And that wasn't a space that I had been in before. So being able to kind of look at that from the space of delegation, for one, was something that I probably struggled with, where it was like I have to do all the things and have my finger on all the things, which was then causing an issue because you don't recognize it when, you are tied to a lot of the things that you do. So being able to work consistently with somebody, like I said, outside of the organization itself, who had a little bit more and different experience they could bring to the table and kind of showcase for me, and help me to think about a lot of the things that I probably needed to address from a business standpoint, was super helpful and has made me probably a better individual to work with, which I think is a really great benefit, that the people portion of that, right? Because it's always nice to work with people that you like and who are not difficult to work with. I don't want to say that I was difficult to work with, but I think I'm better now. And I think that's all, part of the growth. And I can attribute that a lot to, the coaching that I had and the way that I was encouraged to think differently when it comes to going from a solo space to one where you are constantly, taking input and feedback and direction from others. So I can appreciate that. And just as a blanket thank you to you all for what you do. I have personally seen the value and seen it, in other organizations. So clearly what you all do is necessary and incredibly helpful in building. I am going to throw this up here really quickly as we get to any last questions. So if anyone has something that they want to ask, like I said, make sure you pop it into the chat now. How can the audience learn more if they are interested in learning more about coaching or the services offered, or what could potentially be a customized solution for them? So where do they go? What do they do?
Yeah, I see the contact information for Boost here.
Yep.
The email is for Lindsay Moore, who heads up the specialty group in our organization, and then see that both Wendy and I are on LinkedIn, and would be happy to share more about the coaching process and talk about individual needs of any potential client's organization. Every organization is different. Every organization has different things that are important to their success. And we talked about chemistry previously, and it's really, really important that leadership at any potential clients feels comfortable with the types of coaches that they would be engaging.
Awesome. Wendy, anything to add?
No, if you're interested, please reach out. I'd love to do a 30-minute discovery call to understand what you're facing and try to be helpful and move forward and find the right program for you.
I think it all starts with a conversation. I think to see where the potential lies and the fact that there may be things outside our purview that could be beneficial and help us to achieve a little bit of that growth that we're all looking for in the space. So I want to say a thank you to both Wendy and Carolyn for sharing their expertise with us. And as promised, I will pop the recording over and you should be able to get a copy of it in your inbox once it is finished processing. So if you have any questions post-event, if there is something more nuanced you'd like to discuss, if something pops up because you were thinking about this, over dinner while you were brushing your teeth, happy to answer any of those questions. And, you can send an email over to Lindsay over there at Boost and she'll help get you into the right track, which put you in the right direction. And we also, like Carolyn said, encourage you to follow both Boost and Wendy and Carolyn on LinkedIn, because Boost is really good at posting a lot of the things that they're doing, as well as some really interesting and entertaining content over there as well. So thank you for joining us today, for everybody, and have a great rest of the week. And we will see you guys on the next one. So thank you both.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you, everyone.